Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, may I present the most overhyped death metal album of 2021. Yep, we're going there. We've never really talked about a lot of brutal death metal on the Metal Meltdown before, not so much because I actively dislike it or anything, contrary to popular belief, but simply because in context of an album review, there just isn't ever usually a lot to talk about. I would argue this particular subgenre, more so than any other of death metal, and by extension extreme music, is the most musically conservative and outright stubborn. It is a genre that leaves little room for, and frankly has little interest in, a lot of creativity and expansion. It's not interested in a lot of conventional or even unconventional melodies. It's not interested in any particularly technical or progressive musicianship. It's not interested in high concept storytelling or modern production value, and it is most certainly not interested in the more PC lyrical themes and concepts of more modern bands like Immortal Bird and Venom Prison. It lives via an incredibly strict guideline of rules and will die on that sword if asked to do so. Let's put it this way, even a genre as conservative and stubborn as traditional black metal is still willing to make a little bit of wiggle room for some symphonic undertones or some keyboards or some clean vocals, whereas brutal death metal simply isn't and won't, and will probably bemoan you for daring to ask for those things. Long story short, brutal death metal, for better or for worse, is extremely one-dimensional, hence why we've never really talked about a lot of brutal death metal. There's only so many times in an album review I can say, whoa, those riffs, those vocals, those drums are so fucking brutal, and have it retain any meaning. But even I can't escape the hype surrounding this particularly brutal release from Sanguisugabogg, or Sanguisugabogg, or I don't know, Sausage Cyborg, however the fuck their name is pronounced. Because frankly, I can't remember the last time there was this much buzz surrounding a brutal death metal record. Maybe the Outer Heaven debut? I don't know, does that count as brutal death metal? The point is, people are going fucking gaga over this debut album, Tortured Whole, from, I don't know, Sangi. For simplicity's sake, let's call them Sangi, or Sangu, because I've truly no fucking clue how to pronounce their fucking name. Stating here in a press release, Tortured Whole is a demonstration of sludgy traditional death metal of the highest order, with a slaughterhouse's worth of body parts and punishment oozing from any speakers brave enough to broadcast it. To say that the joyful humor with which it is all delivered is tongue-in-cheek would be to do it a disservice. Sangu, as I'm calling them once again, is more of a severed tongue used to defile fresh victims. My god, y'all seriously went fucking apeshit over what was ultimately, despite all of this buzz and despite all of these super big important words, a remarkably generic, one-dimensional 90s brutal death metal record. I mean it, folks. I really don't see what the big fucking deal is. I don't see what makes this particular band so much more special and exciting than any other brutal death metal band out there, aside from the sonic authenticity. Like, if you are a 90s brutal death metal nerd on par with somebody like Jimmy from the Block, I can see why you would dig this. I get it. I don't agree, but I get it. But that also makes the music all the more predictable, all the more repetitive, and ultimately all the more boring and forgettable. The music is consistently very dark and very dirgy and extremely one-dimensional. The riffs are caked in static and mold and maggots, and I'm sure that'll make all the brutal death metal nerds happy, but when I look at these songs individually and objectively, I'm just not really seeing anything that fun. I'm just not having a fun time. It is every tried and true death metal stereotype combined into a package that I'm just supposed to believe is amazing because it's so authentic and so true and so brutal. The percussion is very tinny, the bass kind of bleeds in with everything else and loses its impact because it's just as deep and low and muddy as everything else on the fucking record. The vocals especially are the most generic, run-of-the-mill, Cookie Monster death metal gutturals I think I've heard on any record in a very long time, coupled with lyrics that, in my opinion, would not be out of place on a more modern 6 Feet Under record. It's just so lame. It sounds like the kind of shit that a teenager writes after listening to death metal for the first time ever. Like, I'm just not vibing with this thing one bit. I'm not vibing with the chunky low-end grooves of Menstrual Envy. I'm not vibing with the very minimalistic caveman death metal of Dragged by a Truck. I'm not vibing with the very lethargic and almost hilariously stupid Dick Fillet. Frankly, I was bored shitless by nearly every second of this record, and I'm not going to pretend that I wasn't, simply because it's so brutal, so nasty, so gross and violent. Oh my god, old school 90s brutal death metal. Rah! Yes, it is all of those things. But an album being all of those things does not automatically make it good. So at the risk of being in the minority, I'm gonna say it, I don't think this is a very good album. In fact, I think it's kind of bad. It never grabbed my attention or piqued my curiosity, and I am willing to bet that if you threw this on some brutal death metal playlist, that I would not be able to differentiate any single song on Tortured Whole from any other song on that playlist. I'm certain my words will offend and upset many of you that have been anticipating this record so heavily, but with all due respect, I could not give less of a fuck because, quite frankly, I have had a far more entertaining experience with literally just what has been released in the past 3 months, with records from Gatecreeper, Frozen Ice, Fractal Generator, and so many more that have provided genuinely interesting and expansive experiences while delivering all the brutal goodies that one expects from any subgenre of death metal. So yeah, 1.5 out of 5. I'm probably going to be alone on this to a certain extent, but once again, fuck it. I just thought this was a really, really, really boring and overhyped record. The same press release I read from earlier quite literally recommends the album for fans of Sewage, and on that note, me and Sanguisugabogg actually agree, because my god does this shit stink. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.